Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Patio Commentary. I'm your host, Matt Jarbo, and today we're going to be doing a quick dive into the 1987 neo-Western vampire-ish movie, Near Dark, directed by Catherine Bigelow. This is her second movie, and it's one that I didn't know much about going into it. I knew that it was a vampire film. I knew that it had Bill Paxton and Lance Henriksen, and it was directed by Catherine Bigelow. And I was like, oh, that's a great combination. You know, I loved her work on Strange Days. The Hurt Locker was a well-crafted thriller, even if it was wildly unrealistic. And what you have to remember about The Hurt Locker is that when it came out, it was touted as like the most realistic war movie ever made, which is just simply not true. And then, you know, Zero Dark 30 and what she did like Detroit after that. So she hasn't really done much in the last couple of years. But anyway, this movie came out at a time when the only way for her to get this movie made was to largely just bill it as a vampire film. So they basically crafted a Western around or a teenage romance movie really around a Western theme during that time period where you had a bunch of vampire films. And that should give you every indication as to what about this movie went horribly wrong from the get-go. This is not a bad movie by any metric. This is not a great movie by any metric either. It's a one-time watch for me, unless I'm with a group of people and they just are desperate to watch it. My biggest complaint with this is that you don't have any time during the movie is anyone called a vampire, talked about vampire lore necessarily, or any kind of vampire teeth. Even Christopher Lee in the old Dracula films from Hammer put in the damn prosthetics. This movie had none of that. Now, granted, it only had like a $5 million budget and it only grossed $3.4 million when it came out. This came out the same year as The Lost Boys, which is probably the quintessential vampire film. It is hard to get a better vampire film out of the 80s than, you know, The Lost Boys, maybe followed briefly, very closely by like Fright Night or something. But Near Dark is not necessarily one that I think should be looked at in like the pantheon of top tier vampire films. I think if you removed the vampire aspect of it and they were just like immortal or zombie-esque or some kind of, you know, Draugr or something along those lines. I don't know. It's a fucking like Skyrim reference, I guess. It would be maybe a little bit different, but let me talk about like, what about the movie bothered me from like a storytelling perspective. And I'm not trying to dog on it. The movie is very simple. It's meant to be simple. It was a very cheap movie. The biggest problem though, is you've got Adrien Parar playing Caleb Colton, and he meets, what is it? May in the first like 3 to 5 minutes of the movie. And he runs up on her and he does like that, gee golly, oh shucks, I'm just a good old boy from the South. I want to show you around. And then he starts making moves on her and moves on her and moves on her. And she's clearly not into it. And he clearly doesn't take no for an answer. And it's just like, it was creepy. Like I felt uncomfortable watching the first like 15 minutes of this movie when he's trying to court her. And it's weird. It's like, this is the hero we're meant to empathize with, that we're meant to go on this journey with, you know, because like, he's like, I ain't going to take you home until you give me a kiss. Yeah. Okay. Kind of rapey. All right. So she kisses him, she nicks him on the neck. And then immediately he's not feeling well. His truck breaks down. He's running home. He's smoking, right? Because he's not a full vampire yet, but the sunlight hurts him. And then the people roll on up in the Winnebago and they capture him and they take off, and no explanation as to what they are. You know, again, at no point in time in the movie is it said that they are vampires. Now, look, do they have to say that? No. Okay. But even in werewolf movies, the word werewolf is going to make an appearance. And I think in any other vampire movie, the word vampire makes an appearance. It's just something that it's like a staple, I guess, you know, solidifying the genre. I don't know why they wouldn't have it in the movie. I'm assuming they're probably something along the lines of copyright. I got no freaking idea. Like Bram Stoker's Dracula was absolutely in the public domain at that point in time. So I don't know. But what you have is the weird family dynamic Okay, so like they're all put together by this little kid named Homer, who is the old man, and he turned everybody. Lance Henriksen plays Jesse, who's been around since the Civil War. He fought for the South, and then he happened to just be like driving along one night many years, beforehand, sees Jeanette Goldstein, who was also an alien or Aliens and Terminator 2. You know, sees her and he just like turns her and she's all going like, man, remember that night? That was a good night. You see me all there alone on the side of the road and you just took me as your bride, sort of thing. And you're like, okay, a lot of Stockholm syndrome going on here. And that's a lot of what, and then you got like Severin, which is played by Bill Paxton. And Bill Paxton had fun making this movie. And he is the draw of this film. Like he is that kind of like young gun, that young gunslinger, the gung ho. I'm just going to run in guns blazing. I'm just going to be crazy. And like, that's what I want. And every time he was in the movie, he was great. Like Bill Paxton was awesome. I can see why he's on the cover. Adrien Parar, the hero of the movie, never on the cover. You'll see posters with like Lance Henriksen. You'll see posters with Bill Paxton. You see posters with the bad guys. And that's who the audience is kind of meant to identify with, I think, in regards to like their overall desire. To like who they're going to want to see more of. Because it's not the hero. Like he just dragged the movie down. Like nothing against Adrien Parar. Like he wasn't working with much because they were keeping this as simple as humanly possible. And then you have Jenny Wright as May. And that was just, it felt so forced, that relationship. I know it was meant to be this like teenage romance sort of thing, because you find out that like she was in high school when she was turned by Homer. So you can assume at that point she's under the age of 18. She's only been a vampire for 4 years. And then she's like hooking up with Caleb, who is probably like 18, 19, somewhere in there. We don't know how old he is. We have no idea how old really any of them are. They just want to kind of like dance around the subject, so to speak, right? Kind of weird. It gets a little bit weird as the movie goes on. Obviously, the best scene in the film is the bar scene and the shootout scene. I thought both were excellent. When the movie gets down to kind of brass tacks for like having it be like a neo-Western and having it really play into like the outlaw, like nomadic tribe aspect of it, the movie definitely shines. Like the shootout in the hotel was great because they were, just blindly shooting out the window, trying to keep the cops at bay, even though they can get shot, but the sunlight's coming through and it's perfectly fine. And, it was a good scene, but it was so over the top and like they couldn't even hit the side of the barn. They couldn't even, they killed one cop in that scene. And then that was it. Like that was it. But the bar scene was pretty cool when they're just kind of like, Severin's going around and just kind of torturing everyone and killing everyone. But we also don't really see them feed. They have to feed every night. That's the whole point. They have to feed every night. So they're killing each of them. There's 5 of them. They're each killing 360 people a year. They're leaving behind, over around 1,800 kills that they feed on, never mind who else just happens to get in the way. So they're killing probably around 2,000 people a year. And they're just, so I feel like there would be more of a manhunt, we are aware of this. We are finding these bodies. There is a bigger problem happening here. And that could have really expanded the story. I feel like if that would have been better than what we ultimately got with like the main character. What really got me though, what really bothered me, was the fact that Caleb's dad was a veterinarian, and Caleb looks in the back of the vet van and goes like, have you ever thought about a blood transfusion? Like this kid's like, an Okie from the sticks. And he's like, hey, have you ever thought about like blood transfusion? So his dad gives him a blood transfusion and it cures the vampirism just like that, and you don't even really know that it happened. You just know that like he's hanging out with his sister in the daylight and he's not burning. So clearly, like either he's got his dad's blood and it just makes him kind of immune. I don't know. They don't explain anything. And then, the vampires come back and they kidnap the young sister, and Homer wants to turn her into like his mate, even though she's only like 7 or 8 years old. And he's like, I want you, baby, sort of thing. And then here comes, Caleb without any special abilities. And, and he's going to go and fight all these people. But you don't even really know if he has any special abilities or not. And they don't know that he doesn't have any special abilities. So that's why it was really interesting after Severin gets blown up with that particular jackknifing fuel truck, which, again, at the beginning of the movie, there is a whole scene where they're trying to get Caleb to feed on this truck driver. And the truck driver is giving him proper instructions for how to jackknife and turn the semi-truck into basically like an exploding fireball. You can always see this kind of stuff in movies. You know what I mean? Like there's always going to be that plot device that shows up later on. Like the movie Fear, there's this like spear or something, or some kind of weapon that you are shown in the beginning of the movie, and that ends up being the item that kills him in the end. Is that kind of stuff. But so like, this is what I don't get. And this is what bothered me. So they're able to like get the girl out of the car, right? So May sacrifices herself, so to speak, to get the sister out of the car because she loves Caleb. Okay, great. Caleb's running over with a jacket to cover her up. Homer is running out of the car trying to get her because he's like just infatuated with this like 10-year-old girl. And he ends up just exploding, which is cool, by the way, and unexpected. But then like they go back to the car that's already generally been like sealed up with all this aluminum foil and spray paint and everything else. And Lance Henriksen and Jeanette Goldstein, they're absolutely like, they're covered up, but they're smoking. And they're like, it's been a fun ride. Yeah, it's been a fun ride. And then they just explode. Like they just die. Like I figured they would have turned and driven away and done the best that they can to stay out of the sunlight. Like that's what I feel would have happened with this. I feel like that should have been the ultimate like move there. But they don't, and then they get May back to the house, back to the barn, and they give her a blood transfusion, and then she's now been cured of vampirism. So then, him and May can now be together as a couple. It's weird, like, and not in like a great way. You know what I mean? Like not in an like just outright stellar way. I was like, okay, like, when's this movie going to really get going? Like when is the promise of everything that I've been told about this movie going to kind of kick in? But I understand that it had its limitations and they were trying to make it a certain way, make it something a little bit different for the time. But when it comes to like these kind of creatures, like you don't really want to mess around with the lore. You don't want to mess around with what people understand a vampire is, or a werewolf is, or a mummy, or a zombie, or anything else. When you start doing that, and you don't have a good enough hook to explain it, it just feels like such a dang waste of a movie, So like I said, this is basically like a one-time watch. But as I was reading up on it to kind of do this little quick thing on it, one of the things I saw on the Wikipedia page mentions that Severin has apparently been identified as a queer-coded character. And this is something I've been noticing more as I read about horror. And I understand that horror is very much representative of the LGBT space because of, you have the fear of the other, you've got body horror, transformations, that kind of stuff, right? I completely understand. The article in question, I went to go read it. The article in question called Severin queer coded. This is on like Slash Film from a couple years ago. Called Severin queer coded, and then says, I have honestly no way of identifying what his sexuality is. So it's like you are labeling a character as being queer coded, as being largely gay, because he's a lone wolf and a hot shot and an uber machismo kind of guy. And then you go, I actually have no idea what I'm talking about here. That was so weird. That was one of the things that stuck out to me after I watched the movie. I'm like, wait, okay. Well, I mean, it doesn't add anything to the movie. Doesn't really take anything away from the movie. I just thought that was, when you read these, my whole point of bringing it up is when you read these kind of things, it's like, it's weird, it brings out weird opinions. At the end of the day, I'll look at something like Near Dark and I'll go, okay, again, kind of a one-time watch. I don't have a desire to sit down and watch it again. Nothing about the movie is going to make me think about it or connect with it in any real way. But I would watch the bar scene. I would watch the shootout scene again. I would watch the climax again. Those moments, it was good. I wish it would have leaned into that. I wish it would have leaned into the lore, leaned into the family dynamic. If the whole point of the movie was them trying to get Caleb to be one of them, and he was always going to be a person who wasn't ever going to do it, right? Like, he doesn't kill anyone in the movie. That's, again, not even anything that's remotely like out of character. Like, like, there's no way they would have the hero kill a guy in the movie because he wouldn't be the hero anymore. So they played that up, and you just know that's coming. But if they just would have done more to really kind of sell the family, I think that would have been interesting. Well, so it turns out a couple of years back, about 18 years, in fact, they were talking about doing a remake of the movie. This is, of course, in like the early 2000s, when all of these like low budget Japanese horror movie remakes, like, The Grudge, The Ring, all those were coming out, right? And a lot of them weren't good. The Grudge, I'm looking at you, you pile of crap. The Ring is amazing, but The Grudge is god awful. Anyway, so when they were doing that around the year 2006, there were talks about trying to reboot it. The problem, though, is it got canceled because there were too many comparisons to the Twilight franchise. This is effectively Twilight for the 1980s vampire crowd, right? It's a melodramatic teen love story, and that's what it is. And maybe that's why I don't like it, because I hate Twilight. I loathe Twilight. But I read that after I saw the movie, but I think it kind of summarizes one of my distastes for the film. But anyway, I could be wrong. I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts about this. So if you guys are listening to this on YouTube, please do me a solid. Let me know your thoughts about Near Dark. Am I wrong about the movie? Is it so good or so bad it's good? Is it misunderstood? Is it underrated? Is it a great Western, a great vampire Western? These are things I want to know. So let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you guys so much for listening. Have yourself a great day, everybody, and peace out.